Alright, this is part 2 of the LA610. I'm going to go ahead and turn the baby on. I really like this LA610. It does a lot of magical things. And before with the first video, I set up a basic setting that you want to start with every time, or the setting that I use every time I start and use the LA610. So this time I'm going to go through and kind of show you how to use it left to right, kind of linear, how it's, in order to get the best gain. First thing you want to do is you want to go here with your input switch. And the input switch has 3 different inputs. You could choose high Z, which is this 1/4 inch jack right here in the front. You choose line in, which is a balanced input on the back. And then you could choose mic, and that's also on the back. The high Z is used for when you're recording bass guitar or electric guitar or any kind of passive, relatively not active inputs. So something like a sampler or a keyboard, you would want to plug that into the line input on the back if it's balanced. If it's unbalanced, you may want to try the mic input, depending on what results you get. So the front here, and you have 2 different impedance settings. You have 2.2 and you got 47K. And after you've decided your input, depending on what you're recording, then your very next stage in the LA610 is this first gain stitch right here, this gain switch. So the gain switch goes -10 or +10, and my setting is starting at 0, and I kind of tend to leave it at 0 unless I need more or unless I have too much. I might even leave it on 0, and if I had too much I might use the pad switch, which is the very next part on the gain stage, which is where I'd go next. The phase switch, if I was recording a bass, the phase might not matter unless it was, for some reason, the bass was wired a little funky, and at that point, maybe if I was in or out of phase, I might hear something slightly different that is better or worse. But again, I would just toggle it. If I was using 2 mics in the proximity of each other, the phase would be very important, and that is directly where it would be something you would need. The phantom is only going to work on the mic inputs. It won't work on the high Z here in the front, and it won't work on the line input. It basically doesn't send phantom or 48 volts to those inputs. It only sends it to the mic input. So only when you're using a mic is when you're going to ever even possibly need 48 volts. The very next part in the gain stage is this big level knob, and this is on the gain section over here. So my setting is I starts at 11, and the reason why, or 7, is I start so high is because I'm trying to get some gain right off the bat, and so I just start at a higher point. If I'm at 7 and I'm at 0, and when I'm with my meter switch, I'm viewing the preamp, and right here we have nothing plugged in, so I'm just talking about it, but basically the needle's down at 0, and I'm viewing preamp, and so if I'm sending a signal through the gain, the needle's going to go up to 0 depending on how much gain I have. And so right off the bat, at 7 and 0, I could be doing some bass, and I could watch, and I could see, oh, okay, there isn't much gain, so maybe I need to start here, or maybe I need to not pad. So you kind of make these decisions right off the bat. The very next part of the stage, it goes into the EQ shelving section. I don't touch the EQ until the very end. And I try to not do that because that is destructive. It's going to go into your recording, so you may or may not want to do that too crazy. It's basically a high and low shelf. You got 4.5K, 10K, and 7K, and you go plus or minus 9 dB. And then on the low you have 70, 200, and 100. The low is what I end up using the most. Let's say I'm recording a bass and it's really thin sounding. I might go to 70 and do +3, just to get like a quick little more boost to a thinner bass sound. Let's say I have a bass and it's already just really bassy and it's got a big woofy sound to it. I might go to 100 and subtract 1.5 just to get a little less, less bass. But again, I kind of don't start there. I leave it at its default. The very next section is that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to compress. Now, by turning on the compressor, you got to turn your mode switch from bypass to comp. There's also a limiting section. I tend to not use it that much. I pretty much always use the compression side. Once I turn on compression, I want to view compression. So the very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my meter switch to comp or compressor, and you notice the needle jumped to 0. Now the needle's at 0 because as I turn up my peak reduction knob, I'm going to get more gain reduction. And then as you're playing your instrument through it, you're going to watch the needle come down from 0 in dB of how much gain reduction you're getting. So as you turn this knob up, you're going to get more gain reduction. There's a few rules of thumb with compression. Less compression is more. The bigger thing you want to think about it is with compression, as you are compressing, the needle has to drop down and then come back up to 0. If the needle's never getting a chance to go back to 0 with your program, you're technically limiting at that point and you're no longer compressing. So even though this is a compressor, you can limit with it if you over-compress. So depending on your program, depending on what you're recording, the needle may come back more quickly or less quickly, or it's just something you have to play with. What I tend to do is I tell people 3 to 8 dB of reduction. You want to work in there. Just watch the needle and watch it come down from 3 to 6 or 3 to 10, and if it's getting to 10, that's pushing it. But there are no rules. If you like the sound of 10 dB or 14 or even 18 dB of compression, if you like it and it sounds good for what you're trying to record, do it. That's cool. And with the LA610, this is it's got a T4 cell inside here, and this is a really transparent compressor. I mean, it sounds great, so you really could compress a tremendous amount and like it. So that's okay. The very last thing you're going to do with the LA610 is you're going to turn to the output knob, and again, both with the output and the preamp, the needle jumps down to 0 or all the way left point. And what you're going to watch is that if you're viewing preamp and you're turning a thing, the needle's going to go up to 0 or above 0 for how much preamp is happening. When you're on comp, your needle's at 0 and it's going to go down from 0 and how much dB reduction. And when you switch to output, it goes back to the far left position, or -25 here, and it goes up to 0. Now what you're going to do is, this is your output. Think of this as your output of your mixer, and this knob, its whole job, and it doesn't add any tone or any color to your recording. All it does is say, don't clip my next input. So sometimes, depending on how you set your preamp and depending on how much compression you're going, sometimes you may need to be down to 4 or 5 or even 3. I mean, it's very possible depending on how much gain you have got going. Sometimes you're going to need to turn this all the way to 10, and that's okay. The whole goal is that you're going to turn this knob and let it be anywhere it needs to be in order to not clip your next input. So if you're going to tape deck, you're going to want to watch the meters on the tape deck, or you're going to want to watch the VU meters and just make sure that the sound you're getting is a sound you like and that you're not peaking too much. It may sound great on a tape deck to peak. If you're going to an audio interface, you're going to want to turn this knob just high enough so that you're not getting any red meters on your interface, assuming when you get red meters that it doesn't sound bad. Generally right off the mat you'll hear this input clipping sound that's really brittle and terrible, and you won't like it. So essentially, this is probably a really important factor here with this, is that because it says gain, it's really not doing any gain. It's really just, it's a big attenuator output for the whole LA610, and you just need to set it wherever it needs to be set. There is no wrong place. And that's really it with the LA610. And in the third video, I'm actually going to use audio in here and share it with you. Why not?